Static in my mic, static in my mic. Maybe coming in a little hot. Hello, hello. Ah. Cool, let's get started. Before we start, a couple of announcements. First, I am brand new to Twitch. So I've been teaching on Zoom, but decided to make the leap this last weekend. I'm over 30, so I'm a bit a fish out of water here, but I'm figuring it out, and I'm excited about a lot of things that are possible here. Better sound quality, there's a good music production community that I'm starting to explore, and I'm glad to be a part of. So I'm still figuring out all my settings. And if you have any issues with the stream quality, or if you get a lot of dropouts, or have any feedback at all about how this goes, please drop me a line. I want to hear. I'd really appreciate it. So you can send me a private message, which on Twitch I just learned is called a whisper, and or you can send me an email or whatever. Second, there are a whole bunch of new people here. I'm really excited that you're all joining. This is actually the 14th class that I've taught in this series, so if you feel like this is over your head, you can check out past classes. Videos are all up on YouTube, and there are written notes for each class in a Dropbox folder. Scroll down and check out past classes, and you can sign up to get access. Everything's free, just on a donation basis, and I'll link you to those if you drop me your email. So my usual format is to do an hour, and then of kind of lecture and guiding you in some practice, and then I'll stick around afterwards for questions and hang out and show you whatever you want to see, talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'm using Ableton's 10 Suite, which is the fancy, expensive version. How's my voice volume now? Let me know. So I'm using Ableton Suite. It's the fancy, expensive version. If you are using standard or intro or light, you may not have all of these devices over here on the left. That's just the way it is. I apologize. I'm going to do as much as I can to work from the devices that everybody has. I'm going to do as much as I can to work from the devices that are built into Ableton. And so get what you can from it. The concepts will translate even if you don't have the exact devices. And yeah, good luck. So one thing I miss about Zoom is being able to see some of your faces. This is a little less intimate than Zoom, which is like a weird thing to say. I can't believe I live in a world where I'm describing Zoom as intimate. But so I appreciate you saying hi in the chat box if you're here, just so I can kind of feel the room. Okay, let's get started. So today is a continuation of last week's class. Last week's class was all about creating variations in MIDI as a way to write material. And oh, hey everybody. I'm sure I'm gonna get distracted by the chat. I'm gonna try to do both, figure this out. So yeah, last week we talked about doing variation in MIDI material in order to compose. And today we're going to do the same idea, but work in sound. Let's dive right in with some practice. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to demonstrate an idea for a couple of minutes, and you should watch. And then I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do what I did in Ableton on your own machine. So I'll go away. I'll be in the chat if you have questions, but you work on your own screen for a little bit, and then listen for me to call you back to demonstrate some more things. So here's the big idea. We are going to be resampling. This is the main technique of today. Resampling is recording whatever you hear in Ableton onto a new audio file. So this kind of bakes in any effects, processing, or layering that you do in on your tracks, and records all of that onto a fresh new audio file. So I'm going to show you how to set this up, and then you can set it up, and then I'll show you how I do this. Then we'll do a quick project. So first, you want to have a blank track to work on. I'm going to name things the way that I do so that you kind of see my thought process here. I make a group, and I often call it the factory. This is where I'm just making sounds. This isn't like a layer of the piece that I'm ultimately creating. And then I have, maybe like workspace and resamples. So you don't have to do this grouping, but this is just to show you how I think about this kind of workflow. But you want one track to work on and another track to record on. And that other track needs to have its input set to resampling. So if you don't see resampling here, if you don't see this menu, it may be that you have this panel hidden, which is the I/O button here. So click I/O and it'll show it. So take a moment now, create 2 audio tracks, and set one of them to have its input be resampling. Cool. So circle back, shoot me a question in the next break if you had trouble with that. Okay, so our first project is going to be practicing resampling by creating a percussion kit out of just a single snare drum. So I'm going to go into samples and search for snare and just look for some kind of generic. It can be anything, but I want to start with something just kind of like boring. Great. So I found myself a boring snare, and I'm going to put it on my workspace. So Ableton's louder than my mic. Thanks. Yes, I need to set this down to like -8 on the master track. How's this? Better? Feel free to let me know and I'll keep adjusting. Okay, so variation technique. Just like last week, I'm going to quickly create a bunch of different variations of this snare. This takes a certain mental attitude. Cool, turning down the volume a little bit more. This takes a certain mental attitude that I describe as unfussy, non-judgmental, playful, I'm just going to work as quickly as I can. I'm not going to think too much about what I'm doing. I'm just going to try to change the sound of the snare and then record it. And do that over and over again. So first I'm gonna, I've got these effects on, take the effects off. Okay, so I'm going to change it. I'm going to add some fade in. And then I'm going to resample. So to resample, you hit record on the resampling track, and then just hit the record button here. Boom. And then move this over. And then I'm going to create another variation. Okay, this is going to have more attack, but it's going to be transposed. Great. Back to the resample track, make sure it's armed, hit record. Boom. Scoot it over. Now maybe I want to play with some filtering. So I'll put on my EQ, filter out the low end. Great. Resample, arm the track, hit record. Move it over. Maybe add some distortion now. So let me grab like Redux. Do some bit reduction. Cool. Here's one. Record. Move it over. Vary it. Maybe saturator, crank it up really high. That's not different enough. Flanger. That sounds cool. Resample. Dial something else in. Maybe we want to make this, let's think about making it a really high, not very percussive sound, but just like a splash. And maybe stretch it out. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna go to warp mode and texture. I know I'm moving really fast. This is just kind of some examples of things that you can do. Stretch it out even more. If I shift drag the edge, I actually stretch the audio file. That's cool. Okay, resample that. So basically I'm just dialing in different versions of this snare sound and recording it. I'm going to do one more and then give you a chance to practice this. Maybe now we want something low to be like a kick drum. So I'm going to transpose it way down. And then maybe add some boom to it with the drum bus. Boom, boom. Cool, so that can be my kick drum. And now I have this new collection of percussive sounds. And next I'll throw them in a drum rack, but I'll wait for you to do something like this and show you more. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. I'd like you to practice this technique. Shoot me questions in the chat if you're confused or if you want to dive into something deeper. Basic idea, take your basic sound, tweak it with any amount of effects or clip changes or whatever you want. Set it to record on the resample track, hit record up here, record it, move it along, make the next one. So we've got 5 minutes on the clock, and then I'll call you back. Starting now. 2-minute warning. Cool effects to try. I should have shown you Corpus is great for adding pitch to these things. We'll touch on Corpus later. "30 more seconds to work on this challenge." And we're at time. Okay, circle back. I hope you were successful in creating a couple of variations on your snare drum. I want to demonstrate what I would do next and give you a chance to try that out, and then we'll move on to the next idea. So here's what I would do with these once I have them. Quickly, I would just visually adjust their gain so they're all kind of similar. Turn this one down a little bit. There's one more I want to make just to show you the Corpus Effect, which is really great for adding resonance to things. So I've got this kind of light thing. I'm going to take Corpus and put it on here. And you can add a resonator of a certain kind of material, like a string, and resonate that object with the sound. So there's one, and then maybe I'll do a different pitch. And then here's another, do a different pitch. Okay, so I've made my variations. The next step would be to go through and listen to all of them and see which ones you like and which ones you don't, and cut the ones that you don't and keep the ones that you like, and maybe give them a new name. Command R lets you give new names to things. I'm going to skip that and just assume that I love all of these sounds and that they're all great. And now I'm going to throw them into a drum rack. So under drums, I can get an empty drum rack, drop it onto an empty MIDI track, and grab to select all of these, go back to the drum track, and drop them in. Boom. Maybe I'll turn up the volume on some of these. The resonator was under Corpus, and I'd say start with one of the presets to figure out how it works. So now I've got a drum rack, and to get some musical material out of these sounds, I don't know, can you hear that at all? Now it's super soft for me. I'm going to turn up. Apologies if it's too much. No, I'll just leave this down and boost my drums. Okay. So now I've got a drum kit, and I'll turn on the metronome, hit record, and then just play some slow patterns. I can always speed things up later and fix timing. I'm just going to play some slow sequences. Something. Doesn't really matter because we can change anything that we do. Anything bad can be made good. That is why we can be optimistic and should be optimistic when we produce music on a computer. Anything bad can become good. Okay, so I'll quantize this and speed it up by double the speed of it, which just makes things more fun. And now I'm just looking for some bar that's interesting to me. Maybe like this. Quantization quick command is Command U. And you can loop an area by selecting some time and hitting Command L. And so then I'll stretch it out and I've got a new loop. So take a moment and do this yourself. Well, I don't know. There's a lot I want to get to today, and this isn't actually on that list. So yeah, take this example as just an example of what you might do once you have a collections of sounds that you resample. Now I want to zoom out a little bit and take this idea and show you, help you imagine other ways that you can use it. So first of all, these are short sounds to be percussive drummy things, but they could be any short sounds, and you could design a kit to play them with like this. And you could make an entire song that's just by loading a bunch of different kinds of samples into a drum rack and making different patterns with them. Resampling is also a way that I often write an ambient track. So just to contrast with these short percussive sounds, let's do a little bit of work with some long sounds. I'm going to demonstrate kind of one way that I sketch material first before I make to make something ambient long tones. So first I grab some synth, and I'm kind of in love with these Alesis ones. It doesn't matter what, so I may as well use sounds that I like. And let's see, I'm not going to be able to fit it all on my screen, so I'm going to leave it down here and just tell you when I'm changing things. So basically, I just kind of go shopping at the beginning of a project. I go shopping for new sounds that I like. Right now, I'll move all this over. I'm imagining making a kind of washy world of rich long tones that fade in and out of each other but fit together but make interesting textures. So I'm going to just go to this synth and resample myself playing long tones on a bunch of different presets. So arming my resample track, input set to resampling, hit record and play some long tones. Then I'll dial in a different preset. Doesn't matter what for this purpose. But I go looking for a sound that I like. Cool. And then I'll record that. And then I'll do a different one. I'll just go make a bunch of long tones with different presets, maybe tweak the settings, find a sound I like. Anytime I hear something cool, I resample it. Who knows what I'm going to use it for? This is just part of an early creative process where I'm shopping for sounds, I'm tweaking things, just looking for things that sound cool. So I've done this before class already to make a bunch of different variations here. And I'll just show you quickly how I would go from that resampling process of recording a bunch of long tones to sketching out a piece. I just make a bunch of layers and stack them up and move them around. So that's the big idea. Recording yourself as you work to generate more audio material for you to use later is a really useful part of a creative process. Let me check. Yeah, okay. So let me talk a little more about, from a workflow perspective, why we would want to do this. Printing down to audio from a MIDI track, from a synth, from a whole effects chain, does take away some of our ability to change things. You know, we can tweak our effects chain forever, we can change our MIDI notes forever. Whenever we resample it, we lose the ability to go back and tweak those things. And so this can be seen as a loss, right? It can seem helpful to keep your options open. But the temptation to tweak is endless. And one of the great benefits of using a bunch of resampling in your workflow is to make commitments to things. It helps you move forward. When you leave all of your doors open, leave all your tracks as MIDI, leave all your audio effects editable, I find that I can spend a ton of time tweaking those things and not moving forward composing my track. So making these commitments, when you get a cool sound, bake it down, resample it into a new audio track, just helps you move forward. I encourage you to trust that process and not worry if the sound is perfect or not. Just trust the process, resample things, move forward, work in audio. If you have trouble finishing songs, I really recommend doing a lot more of this. Close those doors, move forward. And then the other great use of resampling is, as you're seeing here, creating lots of variations. So something that I notice that I do a lot when I work, and maybe you too, is that I make a lot of changes as I try to hone in on a perfect sound, right? I'll change the synths, I'll change the effects, I'll try to hone in on something perfect. But along the way, I maybe find lots of cool variations on that thing. And those variations get lost as I go back then and say, okay, actually I want a different bass sound or something. Maybe that bass sound that I had before was cool and useful. So if you resample every time you hear a cool sound. Then you create variations as you go through that process of looking for the perfect sound. And you never know what you're going to use those for. So yeah, those are the reasons that I resample. This is really all about transformation too. So I, inspired by last week's list of the transformations of a musical motive that I found, I've written my own 9 ways of transforming a sound. So let's take a short pause and I'll answer some questions, and then let's work our way through 9 different ways of transforming a sound, and we'll do it to create 9 different variations or more on any sound that you choose. So why don't you take a moment now and pick some sound that you're interested in working with. Any sample that you got, or any software synth, record yourself playing a couple of notes or whatever. Just get something up on deck and we will take it through the paces of all of these different ways of transforming a sound. Cool, so we'll circle back in a minute. Yeah, the text files, if you're curious about this, they're all in that Dropbox folder, which if you don't have yet, the link is posted on the Discord. It's also in every email that I send. If you just signed up, you maybe didn't get an email, but you will soon with links to all of this. Just about to post that link here on the chat. Hey, if you're just showing up now and you're curious about signing up and getting updates and etc., and having access to the course materials, text files, past classes, scroll down. There's a couple of links around. Yeah. Okay, does everybody have some sound on deck to use? I've chosen, this little snippet of a piano piece that I wrote a couple of years ago. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about signal flow. I'm seeing a couple of questions, and maybe I can clarify things. So, this list gives you all of the sources of sound that you could have when you record onto the track. External in gives you your microphones. All of these are individual tracks. And resampling, resampling is if you want to record exactly what you hear, let me show you with a little layering example. So maybe I want to add some boomy punch to this sound. I can grab a kick drum and put it on another track. Maybe make it quieter to match. Mix them together. And then if I resample, I'm resampling, it'll record everything that I hear. So now I've printed these two sounds together. So resampling records what you hear, and that will go through your master track for the effects, whatever's on here. It's going to go through the group chain, so any effects you have on the group are going to go through it, and what you hear gets recorded. So for that reason, I'm often soloing whichever tracks I want to actually resample, because I'm in some, I have other layers going on and I only want to resample one thing. You can solo the track that you want to resample. Or you can set the input to be some other track. So if I have a lot going on and I don't want to accidentally record lots of different layers at once, I could set my input on the resamples track to workspace. And now it's only going to record sound that comes from here, straight from here. So it won't have factory effects on. It won't have group effects, and it won't have master effects. So you can resample specifically from a particular channel by choosing here, or you can resample everything you hear by choosing resampling. Cool. So let's just talk about transformation. This is what's so exciting and encouraging about making music in this way, because any sound that we have can really become any other sound. We just have to be clever about effects and editing. So I've got this piano sample. And I'm going to loop it. Now, let's think about ways that we can transform sound. So there are, of course, a million ways that you can transform sound, but I'm pretty happy with these as really big categories for things to think about as you work. Okay, so the first one that you can do is wash it out. This is the process of taking something that's really clear and in the foreground and spreading it all out, smearing it around so it fits more in the background. So tools for that are like reverb you might do, a lot of it, turn up the wet, maybe some delay or echo, turn up a lot of that, let it go. Maybe turn up feedback all the way. And now we've got a washy background layer. So as I'm exploring, I might say, all right, let me resample this cool washy background layer that I hear. And maybe I'll even do like a sweep in it. Let me see. Play around with these effects. So I've just done some sketching. Screwed around with some effects, washed out the sound, resampled it, and now I've got a cool layer to play with. I don't know what I need it for yet. I don't need to decide whether it's good or not. I'm just going to give it a name, washy piano with swoops. Swoop like that. Cool. And then put it away. And now try something else. I'm just going to talk through these and then give you time to practice, and I can answer specific questions. This isn't really a class to like talk through a million effects and show you what they do and how they work. This is just kind of a creative prompt for you as you make variations. Oh no, I better put it up here. So you can wash it out, you can multiply it, just thicken it. You can use delays for this, or you can make copies of it. Where did it go? You know, make a bunch of different tracks with layers, make copies, scoot them around a little bit so they're not all exactly the same. Duplicate your tracks, just make, you know, maybe transpose, detune some of them. And every time you find a cool sound, awesome, resample it. You can change the pitch with transpose. There are a couple of effects for pitch shifting. You can change the texture of it with these kinds of effects that change the color of the sound. There's a million things you can do in this category. Try EQing, or use the auto filter, gate, or phaser to change the balance of frequencies of the sound. Combine it with another sound. This you can think strategically and compositionally. Think about what one sound has and what it lacks, and maybe make up for that sound what it lacks with another sound. Like if you've got a really nice, crisp, punchy sound, but it doesn't have a good thump and you want it to be a bass drum, mix it with something thumpy. You can cut it up. We did a whole class on creative editing with a breakbeat as an example, so you can do that kind of thing too. Resample it. There are tons of cool devices if you go down the Max for Live rabbit hole that do different versions of like stutters and slicing things up and shuffling them around. There's also a whole category of sampling synthesis kind of combo called Granular Synthesis, where it takes little tiny slices of the sound. Let me turn this off. And sprays them into like clouds. You can add motion to sounds. Any device with an LFO is great for adding motion. These are some examples. And you can always just record yourself turning knobs and create motion in your sound that way. These are some advanced things. Maybe we'll save for their whole own class. And I encourage you, whatever you're doing, the best way to learn about what effects do is to try to break them. Turn knobs to extreme settings, make things really obvious, try to get wild sounds that you don't expect. You don't really know what they're for, so you don't have to decide whether they're good or not. Try to break the sound, resample it, save it for later, and you'll be surprised how you're able to use bits and pieces of whatever to create a composition. Like in our Composing by Tidying Up class a couple weeks ago. I did resampling for that. I just resampled myself playing some bad improvisations on a bunch of synthesizers, and then we arranged them into a 16-bar loop and composed ourselves something that made sense out of all of these materials that didn't make sense. So my main method for writing music is step 1, make a mess. Step 2, clean up that mess. And resampling is a really key part of making a mess. And yeah, so that's the big idea. I'm going to stop talking now and let you guys practice. So I'd like you to take the sound that you made. You can refer to this list for inspiration. Try resampling a bunch of different variations of it. Give them names when you like them. Put them away. And I'll answer questions in the chat as we go. Cool. One more minute, then let's come back. Okay, come on back. I really wish I could hear all the sounds that you've been working on right now. If you want to bounce me anything and drop it on the Discord, I can stick around and listen to things there. All right, so that's pretty much class. I'm going to show you one more thing that's pretty crucial for your own kind of creative I don't know. It's all about building your own library. Yeah. What we're doing here is creating kind of our own sample packs, right? And these are all things that you can keep around and use in future projects. So let me show you how to save these things, organize them, and keep track of this stuff for future work. First, saving samples. Let me point you to your user library. User library is somewhere on your system. It's in common between all of your projects, and you can drag and drop stuff here, make your own folders, and organize them however you want. So it comes with these basic folders, but you can make your own and make subfolders by control clicking and saying new folder. And then you can drag things here. So let me hear what this was. Great. So this was some kind of, kick drum. So I'll call it like pancake, kick, whatever I want, and then drag it into samples. And again, you can make your own folders to organize things if you start getting a lot of these. So you can save samples there. When you make yourself a drum rack, you can basically any device look for the floppy disk icon. It's on every effect, it's on every instrument. Click that and it'll save that as a preset for that instrument. So I can call this like Elliot's snare percussion. And now when I go under drums and I look at my presets, there's Elliot's snare percussion. So every time you work for a while building yourself something cool, whether it's an effect, a whole effects chain, an instrument, a synthesizer with certain settings, anything that you put time into and might want to use again, find the floppy disk icon, hit it, give it a name, and it will, I don't know, long term, the project is to build yourself a library of samples and presets that are unique to you, that you've put your own time and thought into. And this is really the project of developing your own sound. So at the beginning, when you start, you use other people's samples, other people's packs, other people's loops, other people's effects presets. But if you save it each time you make your own thing, eventually you'll live in a world where all of the sounds that you make are unique, and that's going to give you a unique kind of style. Okay, couple of closing announcements. First, thanks so much for showing up. Again, I'm just figuring out Twitch. Stick around, give me feedback if you need it. There's one thing I'd like you to do for me. There's a bell, I think it's a bell button on top. No, that's the, how do you follow? I guess it's a heart. Hit the heart above this thing if you want to follow it. And hit the bell if you want notifications. Sign up on the email list. There are links below if you want email announcements and access to past class materials, text files, and so on, and videos. I do this all on a donation basis. If this is useful for you and you have a couple extra bucks, send them my way. I'd appreciate it. There's a way for us to keep in touch in between classes, which is a Discord chat server that I run just for this community. So scroll down to the community button and follow that link if you want to join there. That's where you can send in work if you want some feedback from me or from other people in the class. If you have questions, people post cool free stuff online. That's a way that you can keep in touch. I keep a listening list also of music that I think is really awesome, that inspires me from a music production, computer music standpoint, and you can follow the link there for that playlist. And our next class is a continuation of the series I've been doing about mixing, introduction to mixing. We've done EQ for clarity, compression for presence. This week on Thursday at 1 p.m., we're going to do space, creating environments and depth in our compositions. So that's going to be a deep dive onto how reverb actually works and how delays actually work and how we can use them creatively and tastefully. Thanks. I'm going to stick around if people have questions and want to hang out and want to see more stuff. But otherwise, thank you for coming and see you Thursday. Keep in touch. Yes, classes are recorded and they'll stay up here for 60 days on Twitch. I'm also recording them on my end so I can archive them on YouTube after that. Yeah, on Twitch, if you just scroll down the page, you should see community and a link to Discord. Yeah, thanks everybody. Anybody have any questions? Anybody want to see anything else? We could take a look at some of these effects. I could go over again this process if you came late and you want to see it again. Yeah, my default preset. My default preset for what? Yeah, so I do a default audio track with an EQ8 on it because I EQ every track that I work on. And I have it with a cut at 40 hertz because frequencies below here are irrelevant but clog up headroom. Speakers don't really deal with this. Our ears barely deal with this. even subwoofers in a club, you'll be fine rolling off 40 hertz. On my MIDI tracks, my preset is just to have a simpler on it because that's what I use most. And I also, on my MIDI track, on my audio tracks, my default is set to resampling. If you're interested in setting up your own presets, you just create a track the way you want it and Control-click and say Save as Default Audio Track. Yeah, cool. I'll go over LFO and then talk a little about phaser and flanger. And then we can, then I'll move on to the others. How I route my channels through to my master was actually the question about basic setup. I don't do anything unique here. My tracks go out to the master unless they're in a group, in which case they go out to the group. This is all just like built in. It's just how it works when you make a group. When I get to a mixing stage, sometimes it makes sense to bus things together, but I do that with groups rather than specifically doing a whole bunch of routing. Yeah, nothing fancy or different from the basic Ableton default in my setup. Cool. LFO. I'll talk through LFO. Is there a particular device, Gabriella, that you want to see LFO on? Auto filter is a pretty easy one to understand. Let's do that. Okay, so let me get some sound on here. Can do something nice. I can bring in a piece of mine. Let's see. Yeah, so say you've got some audio file. No, let's do it on this stuff. I just want to work with a wide frequency spectrum. Okay, so this is that rough ambient situation that I sketched. Here is how LFO works. So LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. Low frequency, meaning it cycles usually below 20 cycles a second. And that's because human hearing switches from hearing rhythmic things to hearing pitch things at about 20 cycles per second. So high frequency oscillator is a tone that you would use in a synthesizer. Low frequency oscillator is used to modulate other signals. So let me just dial in a filtered version of this sound. So this is a high cut filter or a low pass filter that mutes all the high frequencies. So if I turn up a mount, it's going to apply this filter as if I'm turning a knob in the shape of a sine wave, smooth from top to bottom. So I have sine wave chosen here as the shape. And if the amount is small, then I make little adjustments. And if the amount is big, I make big adjustments. The speed of turning up and down this filter is here under rate, and you can turn it from hertz to tempo if you want it to be like quarter notes in your tempo, for example. Or you can change the shape. So this is a square where it's just going to toggle off and on. This will ramp up. These are random. too. I guess that's the difference between the block and the line, is this one I hear in all my ears. So an LFO is basically an abstract modulation in some kind of pattern over time. It's a shape that repeats over time that modulates some other thing. It's built in here to modulate how much the filter is happening, but there's also lots of them have it. Like here's phaser. Here's my phased sound and my unphased sound. So if I turn up the LFO, it's going to alternate in the sine wave at this speed from my phased sound to my unphased sound, and I get this kind of motion. LFO on any parameter of any effect. I really like how your mind is working. So max for live, you get all of these, I forget what it's called. It's like the max for live essentials or something. If you go into Ableton, go into your account and look for things that you can download, it's just one of those things. I've got it up here. So on your Ableton page, max for live essentials. I'm pretty sure it's this one, but yeah, one of these. Is this whole pack of devices, and in it is an LFO that is abstract and can be mapped to anything. So you can choose your shape, you can choose the rate, and then you just map it to any knob. So maybe I want the I'll unmap this, map it to the amount, and then I can slowly change how much this LFO is working. Cool. So I'll move on from LFOs now. Let me jump to the next question. Phaser or flanger? Okay, so my understanding of this is imperfect, but I have a general understanding that I think I can convey to you. Okay, so sound is made of waves. Waves go up and down. The phase of the wave is how much it's shifted over left or right. So what a phaser does is makes copies of the sound and then shifts them slightly. So it's as if I had another copy of this sound that I just shifted off a tiny bit. Waves can cancel each other out. If I have a waveform that goes up here and it's playing at the same time that I have the exact same waveform going down, they're going to mix together, cancel each other out, and I'm going to hear nothing. So you can imagine if I take this, maybe you don't have to imagine, make a copy of this, zoom way, way, way in, and if I scoot one of these over a tiny bit, then where the peak of one is, the trough of another is. In sounds that are really complex, it's not going to line up super well. Sounds that are really simple, if this were a sine tone, I could just shift it right off a little bit. So the peaks of one line up with the troughs of the other, and I would get no sound. It would totally cancel itself out. With more complex sounds, if you make a copy of it and you slide it slightly off center, it doesn't cancel out everything, but it cancels out some frequencies. So it's actually a kind of way to filter the sound. It cancels out, it might cancel out like frequencies at 1000 hertz or somewhere else. And so these kinds of slight cancellations alter the timbre of the sound a little bit. It's like a filter of some frequencies. So when I do a phaser does this automatically. It takes multiple copies of the sound and it slides them, it modulates them so they move like rubbing against each other a little bit. And that creates filtering of different frequencies over time. And that's what gives you the kind of slidey around sound where it's like the sound is changing, but it's not changing. It's actually because the filter of the sound against itself is changing. So that's the core idea about phasing, and it's also the same about flanging. One of my favorite images is Cat's audio effects. Let me pull this up for you. Oh, there's one for flange. Come on. Anyway, I've got it in my notes from a past week. Doesn't matter. It's this kind of like sliding of some of the frequencies around against each other. Flanger is similar. I couldn't really explain to you the difference, but it's, you can see quite similar controls. It's not something I use very often, so I can't exactly explain to you what's all going on in here, but that's the basic idea of phasing and flanging. Is that helpful? Cool. I'm going to keep going through these questions. Let's see. Vlad's question about my mixing approach. Is it gain staging and then adding effects and then EQing at the end a decent way? I'm kind of undisciplined about my gain staging. That's something I need to improve about. So don't listen to me about gain staging. Yeah. EQing is the most important thing to do when you're mixing, and I do EQing kind of before and after my effects. I EQ first to cut parts of the sound that I don't want, what I call bracket EQing. One of my classes from a couple of Thursdays ago is all about EQing. I encourage you to go back and take a look at this. And then there's EQing that you do. So I'll cut parts of the sound that I don't need first. So I'm not processing sound that I am not going to use. Then there's the process with EQ of shaping the sound, making it brighter or darker, giving it just a little better color. And that is nice to do after effects because then you're actually shaping the final sound rather than kind of adding the wild card of the effects after. So yeah, I recommend cutting frequencies early in your chain and then boosting and doing subtle shaping of EQ at the end. Thanks, Maddie Few. Yeah, I'm gonna, apologies about the mic and Ableton level. I'm gonna work on this. Maybe I'll compress everything from Ableton so it comes out a more consistent volume. That's something I'll try next time, but I have no way of really comparing my voice volume level to Ableton's level, so I rely on your feedback. Shoot me a note at any point in a class if you'd like me to adjust it. Great. Gain staging. Gabriella. This is the process of just kind of controlling the general levels of your tracks. It involves thinking about setting volume at different levels of the process. So it's like getting an even level on the clip level and then getting good volume on the track level and then getting good volume on the group level so that then things are controlled when you mix all your volume levels in the master. Again, it's something that I do in a sloppy way, and it's something that I should do in a more thoughtful way. So look up a tutorial. I'm definitely going to be doing that myself soon. Do I master my own tracks? No. If I'm going to put something out for real, I hire a professional. It's really useful to get somebody else's feedback, somebody else's perspective on the sound. And also, real mastering engineers master all day, every day. They've got super fancy, expensive gear to do it with. It's a whole kind of voodoo world that you can do for yourself with Ozone and plugins like that. And I definitely use Ozone when I'm making demos and drafts, and I just want them to sound better. But when it comes time to go pro, I don't trust myself even to mix. I'll get things close, but hand it over to somebody who does that for a living, and that's really the way you can guarantee that you won't, accidentally. I don't know. That's how you sound professional. Why is it so hard to master? Two reasons. One, it relies on a really subtle kind of listening that just takes lots and lots of practice. It also relies on being able to hear really, really clearly. And hearing really, really clearly depends on having amazing speakers in a treated room, because the room, the echoes and the kind of filtering that the shape of the room does is going to change what you hear. So there's specific gear, speakers, there's specific skills and experience of the mastering engineer, and they just have beautiful, super expensive preamps and compressors, like hardware things that I'm never going to buy because I don't care about that stuff, but I sure want my music to go through it when I want it to sound the best. Do I record stuff at home that I will release or in a studio? My albums so far have been more acoustic, and I've done them in studios. I did, when I was younger, make a couple of hip-hop albums that I did all at home, and I did release, but they didn't end up sounding that professional because I only sort of knew what I was doing. Now that I'm stuck at home, I'm making a ton more music at my computer, and yeah, I'll definitely be releasing the best of that. And not going to the studio. But for recording, microphone-wise, I really would put all of that off until I can get back into my studio. How do I stay objective about whether or not a song is boring or shit? I really try to separate the time that I am creating things and the time that I am evaluating whether they're good or not. If you're evaluating constantly as you're creating, you can't get flow, you second guess yourself, it's just like a very negative experience to create things. So I try to cultivate a habit of deciding as I sit down whether this next half hour that I'm working is time to just make stuff, and whether it's time just to edit and evaluate and improve the things that I've already made. I think it is always worthwhile to stay optimistic, because something that is bad is just like one audio effect or haircut of editing or tweak or new idea away from being good. And so, the creative process involves spending a lot of time with things that are not good. But you just got to believe that if you stick with it and sit down again and again with the same project, that it's going to get better and better. Staying objective also can involve having a couple of people who you trust as artists and as listeners to bounce your tracks off of sometimes. And if you have somebody who's really smart and a good musician and has great taste and is a true enough friend to give you honest feedback, that is a treasured person, and don't take advantage of them, but use them to the utmost. Maddie Few, last question about mixing mastering. Can an intermediate music producer get decent mixing and mastering person on somewhere like Fiverr? Can you always expect it to be super expensive? I have it in my head that that part would cost you so much money. I don't know. My mastering engineer will master a record for $750, and he's awesome. I've never used Fiverr, so I'm not really sure about that. But it's probably a great place to find all kinds of creative people, right? Mixing, you can spend more money if you hand over mixing to somebody because that's a more labor-intensive process, and you can really only mix a track, maybe 2 tracks in a day at a really professional level. 2 is pretty godlike powers if someone has the stamina and ears to mix 2 different tracks in a day. So if you're paying a real recording engineer, a couple $100 a day, having them mix your album can be expensive. What I recommend if you want to keep your costs down, a couple of things. One, you can get really good at it and do it yourself and practice and just say, this is part of my creative practice. I'm learning to be some kind of mixing and mastering engineer. And you can get quite good results with some study and some plugins and some experience. But if you want to go kind of still, I wouldn't trust myself to put out something at super professional mixing and mastering myself, as I said. So a kind of halfway, if you want to keep the costs down as much as possible, but involve a professional also, is that you can get as good a mix as you can, bounce down stems, and give them just as simple a file as possible. So maybe it's just got 6 tracks where you've bounced things down, you've done as much as you can with the processing. And this really simplifies the mixing mastering process for the person on the other end. If most of it's already done and they don't have to dial in new sounds, new EQing and compression for every single sound on the album. So it's definitely worth learning how to get good at. You can save the people that you work with a lot of time, which saves you money. That's my thought. Let's see. How does one find a good mastering engineer? I think you should find an artist that you like and ask them. That's maybe a reach for some artists, but if there's somebody who is small enough that they'll reply to your email, I think that's the kind of thing that people like to share. They love getting work for the people who do good work for them. I can recommend you the couple of guys that I really like to work with, Joe Bransifort and Chris Botta. Best. I think that's really a good word of mouth thing. Cool. I see there are still people sticking around. I wonder how I can be useful to all of you. I'm game to be here for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. Cool. Thanks, Gabriella. Well, if you have more questions, I'm back Thursday, 1 p.m., and I'll talk to you then. All right. Thanks, everybody. See y'all.